Truth Be Told Project.
You've recognized the drift. You've named the burnout. Now the real question is, how do you get your fire back? Over the last few episodes, we've unpacked what happens when the soul slowly slides out of alignment, when what used to feel alive now feels mechanical. We've looked at what burnout costs us emotionally, spiritually, even physically, and we've started to see the warning signs that show up long before we hit that wall. But this moment right here is different, because today isn't about diagnosis anymore. It's about healing. It's about what happens next. See, drift doesn't always begin with rebellion. Sometimes it starts with exhaustion. You didn't turn away from God. You just got tired trying to keep up. And the fire that once burned bright, it didn't go out. It just got buried under noise, hurry, and obligation. Today, we're not chasing performance. We're rediscovering presence. We're shifting from activity to intimacy. Let me ask you something. When was the last time you felt at rest? Not just physically, but mentally and spiritually as well. You felt the rest deep down in your bones. When was the last time you felt still enough to hear yourself think, to sense God's whisper without rushing off to the next thing? When was the last time you created something just because it delighted you, not because it was useful or productive? If you're honest, maybe it's been a while, and that's okay, because the truth is we all drift. But drift doesn't have to be the end of the story. It can be the invitation to start again. Let me tell you a quick story. A few years ago, I was in one of the busiest seasons of my life. Ministry was going and growing a little bit. Opportunities were multiplying. From the outside, it looked like everything was moving in the right direction. But inside, I felt like a boat that had slipped its anchor. I was still in motion, but every wave pushed me a little farther from where I was supposed to be. I remember sitting at my desk at home one night, inbox full, to-do list stacked, and feeling this quiet panic. Not loud, not dramatic, just this sinking sense of disconnection. Like I was doing a lot for God, but I'd stopped being with God. And that moment, that still uneasy silence became my wake-up call, because it showed me something I'd missed. The more I confused movement with meaning, the more I lost both. Maybe you felt that too. Like you're rowing hard, showing up, doing all the right things, but deep down you can feel it. The drift, the quiet ache that whispers, this isn't how it's supposed to feel. That's why this episode matters. Because what I discovered, I didn't discover this until church closed during the pandemic. And I actually had time to reflect and to pray and to think and to figure out what was going on with me. I learned something, and that's what I want to share with you. And I want to share with you that you don't fix drift by rowing faster. You fix it by re-anchoring, by going back to the rhythms that hold you steady when everything around you feels like open water. So in this episode, I call it episode 1.4 of the Drift series, because I meant to just do one episode, which was the first episode in which we diagnosed one of the major causes of drift, or three of the major causes of drift, which is burnout, bore out, and apathy. It led me into somewhat of it opened up a Pandora's box for me, and it had me ask God more questions, and it had me to do some research. And this is what you're tuning in today, episode 1.4 of the Drift series. This is your practical guide to finding your life again, not by trying harder, but by coming home to the rhythms God designed for your renewal. And I want you to think of these rhythms not as rules, but as invitations. God isn't standing over you with a clipboard judging how spiritual your week has been. He's standing with his arms open, saying, come and rest, come and breathe, come and be. In a world that never stops moving, he invites us to re-anchor our souls through these 3 forgotten rhythms: Sabbath, rest for your body; silence, stillness for your mind; and creativity, the expression for your heart. 3 simple anchors, 3 sacred rhythms, each one designed to pull you back toward the source. Now, I know what you might be thinking. Rest, silence, creativity sounds nice, but who has time for that? And that's exactly the point. The reason we feel so unanchored is because we've forgotten that our souls need more than productivity. They need presence. You can't pour from an empty cup. You can't run on fumes and expect to feel whole. And you can't experience intimacy with God when every corner of your life is filled with noise. So this episode isn't about adding more to your plate. It's about clearing some space on your plate. It's about giving grace the room to do what only grace could do. If you felt numb in your walk with God, if you've been restless in your calling, if you've been serving, showing up, doing all the right things, but deep down you feel empty, then this is your invitation home. You don't need a spiritual overhaul. You need a rhythm of restoration, because sometimes the fire doesn't need reigniting. It just needs oxygen. And these rhythms, Sabbath, silence, and creativity, they're the oxygen your soul's been craving. So that's where we're headed today, one rhythm at a time, because when your soul finds its anchor, your fire will follow. So take a deep breath, let go of the hurry, and let's start where God started, with rest. When was the last time you truly rested? And I don't mean crashing on the couch, phone in hand, half watching something on Netflix while your brain quietly scrolls through tomorrow's to-do list. I mean real rest, the kind that restores something deep in you. If that question makes you feel a little uncomfortable, you're not alone. We live in a world that doesn't know how to rest. Every message we hear tells us to do more, move faster, prove our worth, build our brand, keep up. And somewhere along the way, busy became our badge of honor. But here's the paradox. The faster we move, the emptier we feel. We keep running, but we're not arriving anywhere that feels like home. That's why Sabbath matters. I know a lot of people would relegate Sabbath to a certain day of the week because, some people make it about legalism. But the Sabbath isn't about legalism. It's about liberation. When God commanded his people to rest in Exodus, it wasn't because he was tired. It was because they had just come out of Egypt, a culture where worth was measured in bricks, output, and endless labor. In Egypt, you worked 7 days a week. You were defined by what you produced. So when God said, remember the Sabbath and keep it holy, it wasn't just a schedule change. It wasn't just a single day of the week. It was a spiritual revolution. He was teaching them and us to remember, you're not slaves anymore. Remember the Sabbath day to set it apart as holy. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, but on the seventh day he rested. That's according to Exodus 20 and verse 8. Sabbath was God's protest against a culture of endless output. It was a declaration of dignity. You are not a machine. You are my child. Fast forward to today, and our Egypt just looks different. We don't build pyramids. We build platforms. We're still making bricks. They just look like spreadsheets, posts, projects, and constant productivity. And every time we try to stop, we feel guilty. We wonder, what if I fall behind? What if someone else gets ahead? What if rest makes me look lazy? Would I disappoint God if I stop? Would I disappoint my pastor or other Christians that I serve? That's why I call Sabbath rest as a resistance. It's saying no to a culture that never says stop. It's choosing to believe that your value isn't earned, it's given. Let me tell you something I learned the hard way. You can't heal in the same rhythm that made you sick. If your life feels rushed, anxious, and disconnected, it's not because you're weak. It's because you're living in a system designed to keep you that way. Sabbath breaks that system. It reminds you that God runs the world, not your hustle. When you practice Sabbath, you're not just taking a day off. You're making a declaration of trust. You're saying, God, I believe you're big enough to handle what I can't finish. That's why Sabbath isn't laziness. It's faith in action. Now let's get practical, because I know what some of you are thinking. Okay, but how do I actually do this? Here's what I found works. Whether you're brand new to Sabbath or trying to reclaim it again, the first step is to pick a window. Start small. Maybe 24 hours feels impossible right now. That's okay. Try a half a day. Block out maybe 6 to 8 hours where you intentionally stop. You cease from working. Step 2, prepare for it. Sabbath doesn't just happen. It takes intention. Do your grocery run the day before. Wrap up emails. Let people know you'll be unplugged. Create a small boundary around your rest, because boundaries protect beauty. Step 3, stop working. No emails, no errands, no quick projects. Sabbath is the sacred pause between what's done and what's next. Step 4, stop buying. This one surprises people, but it's important. In Sabbath, we remember that God, not Amazon, not Walmart, not Target, is our provider. We step off the treadmill of consumption. Step 5, start delighting. This is the heartbeat of Sabbath. Do something that makes your soul smile. Take a walk. Have a slow meal with someone you love. Laugh. Take a nap. Worship. Create. You're not resting from life. You're resting for life. One of my favorite Sabbath practices is simple. Lighting a candle, sitting in silence with some nice, tranquil, either some lo-fi hip hop or some jazz or some nice classical music, and pray a short prayer. God, today I rest because you rule. And that's it. That one line has a way of recentering my entire week, because Sabbath isn't about what you do. It's about what you don't have to do. You don't have to carry the world. You don't have to fix every problem. You don't have to fix other people's problem when they call, even if they try to guilt trip you for not making an effort to fix their problems. You don't have to be on all the time. When you stop, you make space for God to remind you, I've got this. And here's what's beautiful. When you begin practicing Sabbath, you'll start to notice how restless your heart is being. At first, you'll fidget, you'll feel unproductive. You might even reach for your phone just to check something real quick. That's normal. That's your soul detoxing from hurry, because hurry is a habit. And like any habit, it takes time to unlearn. But if you stick with it, something incredible happens. Peace stops being a concept and starts being a rhythm. You'll feel your spirit exhale, and you'll realize something you maybe haven't felt in a while, and that's joy. You're not being lazy when you rest. You're remembering you're loved. You're not losing ground. You're letting your soul catch up with your body. Sabbath gives you permission to be human again, to live like you trust the God who holds the world and holds tomorrow. So if you're listening right now and you've been running on empty, here's your invitation. Stop. Just stop. Even if just for a few hours this week, light a candle, go for a walk, laugh without guilt, because rest isn't a waste of time. It's the way back home. And once you find that stillness, you'll realize rest isn't the reward for your work. It's the foundation for your worship. Next, we'll talk about what happens once your body starts to slow down, when you finally have the courage to face the noise inside. Because sometimes the silence outside us reveals the storms within us. And it's in the quiet place that God starts to whisper again. Let's talk about that in the next section. The practice of silence and solitude, where God whispers. You've learned to stop, to breathe, to rest without guilt. But have you noticed what happens when the noise finally fades? That's when the inner noise gets loud. The unfinished thoughts, the anxious what ifs, the guilt, the static hum of shoulds. Silence has a way of revealing what hurry was hiding. And that's exactly why most of us avoid it. Because silence can feel like a mirror we're not ready to look into. We live in a world allergic to quiet. We fill every pause with noise, scrolling in lines, watching videos while we eat, falling asleep to voices that aren't our own. Somewhere deep down, we're afraid that if things get too quiet, we'll have to face what's really going on inside. And here's the truth. Silence isn't empty, it's full. It's full of presence, if you'll stay long enough to notice it. The story that captures this better than anything is Elijah on Mount Horeb. He just come off the most intense season of his life. Public victory, then fear, then burnout. He ran into the wilderness, exhausted, and was ready to quit and just give it up and just throw it all away. And God met him in that moment. He met him there right where he was at. And he met him not with a thunderous voice or a spectacular sign, but with a whisper. And it says in 1 Kings chapter 19:12, and after the earthquake came a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. After the fire came a gentle whisper. Why a whisper? Because whispers require something. They require proximity. God didn't need to shout. He just needed Elijah to slow down enough to listen. That's what silence and solitude are really about. Not isolation, but attention. Not punishment, but presence. And let's get honest for a second. When was the last time you sat in silence? No music, no phone, no input for more than 5 minutes. If the idea makes you twitch, you're not broken, you're human. Because modern life has rewired our attention spans. We're constantly stimulated, always reacting to TikTok videos, reels, tweets, posts. We never rest, but the soul doesn't grow, in constant stimulation. It grows in stillness, and silence is the soil where that growth begins. Here's something I've learned from practicing this. At first, silence feels awkward, feels really awkward, almost uncomfortable. Your mind races, your thoughts jump from one thing to the next. But if you stay long enough, you'll feel a shift. The chaos starts to quiet. The anxious thoughts lose their grip. And in that gentle stillness, something sacred happens. You begin to hear the voice beneath all the voices, and that whisper that says, I'm here. You're loved. You don't have to perform for me. We often talk about prayer as talking to God, but silence is how we learn to listen to him. And sometimes that's all he's waiting for us to stop talking long enough to notice his nearness, because in the silence, God isn't giving instructions. He's giving himself. So let's make this practical, because silence doesn't just happen. It's practiced like a muscle. Here are a few ways to begin. First, the first 5. Before you grab your phone in the morning, take 5 minutes to sit in silence. Don't fill it with prayer requests or journaling yet. Just breathe. Let your first awareness be God's presence, not the world's notifications. Second, device-free drive. The next time you're commuting, turn off the podcast. No music, no news. Let your mind wander. Notice what surfaces. You might be surprised by what God brings up when there's space to think. Third, a prayer walk. Take a short walk without headphones. Observe, look at the sky, notice your breath. Say simple words of gratitude. Thank you. I'm here. You're here. This transforms your neighborhood into sacred ground. Fourth, the evening pause. Before bed, dim the lights, no screens. Just sit for 1 minute and reflect. God, where did I sense your presence today? Even that small pause begins to rewire your soul toward awareness. When you get quiet long enough, you'll realize something profound. God never stopped speaking. You just couldn't hear him over the noise. And here's the beautiful part. Silence doesn't just help you hear God, it helps you hear yourself too. You'll start noticing your emotions before they explode. You start recognizing what your body's been telling you. You begin to discern what's actually important and what's just loud. Silence is how you come back to center. There's a line from author Ruth Haley Barton that says, "We are starved for quiet, to hear the sound of sheer silence that is the presence of God himself." And that's it. Silence is not the absence of sound. It's the presence of someone, God. And when you allow your soul to sit in quiet, it's like standing in front of a mirror and realizing you're not alone in the reflection. Now, I know for some of you, silence feels impossible. You're juggling kids, work, relationships, ministry, and the thought of solitude sounds like a luxury. But solitude doesn't always mean isolation. It just means intentional moments of withdrawing to be filled. Even Jesus modeled that. Over and over, the Gospels say Jesus often withdrawn to lonely places and prayed. You can find that in Luke 5:16. He wasn't running away from people. He was running toward presence. He knew that to pour out, you have to fill up. And maybe that's the invitation God is extending to you to step away for a moment, not to escape, but to encounter. When you give yourself permission to be quiet, something happens in the deep places of your soul. You start realizing that God's love isn't a reward for your noise or performance. It's steady even in your silence. You start hearing truth where shame used to live. You start sensing peace where pressure used to rule. And you begin to live from overflow, not exhaustion. So if the world feels loud right now, if your heart feels cluttered and your thoughts are racing, try this. Take 5 minutes today, step outside, turn your face toward the sky, breathe deeply, and whisper back to God, I'm listening. That's it. No agenda, no to-do list, just presence, because silence isn't the goal. Connection is. You want to connect with God. Once your body finds rest, your mind finds stillness, there's one more part of your soul that needs awakening, your heart. And one of the most powerful ways God reawakens is through creativity. This creativity has been a blessing for me. It has been a great joy, more than a lot of things I thought would bring me joy. Nothing has quite brought me joy like expressing my creativity or being creative. And that's what we'll explore next, how expression becomes worship and how creating brings your fire back to life. Let's talk about that in section 4. Creative disciplines, re-engaging the heart. So far, we talked about Sabbath, rest for your body. We've practiced silence, the stillness for your mind. But there's one more part of you that God wants to reawaken, your heart. Because burnout doesn't just drain your energy, it numbs your wonder. You stop feeling, you stop noticing beauty, you stop creating, you just start surviving. And the problem with survival mode is that it keeps you alive, but not awake. Let me tell you something I've learned in my own drift seasons. When my creativity dies, it's usually a sign that my heart's gone quiet. Maybe you felt that too. You used to write, paint, sing, dream, build, imagine, draw, sketch, but now everything feels flat. You look at a blank page or a new idea and something inside whispers, what's the point? But here's the thing, creativity isn't a luxury, it's a lifeline. You were made in the image of a creator. That means creativity isn't just what you do, it's who you are. When you create in any form, you reflect the nature of the one who breathed stars and stories into existence. And when you stop creating, part of you starts to suffocate. Think about Genesis for a moment. Before God did anything else, he created, he imagined, he formed, he spoke beauty into being. And when he made humanity, he handed us that same gift, the ability to take what's raw and shape it into something meaningful. You and I are wired to make things, to build, to express, to sing, to design, to tell stories. It's in our DNA. So when you engage in creativity, you're not just being artistic, you're participating in divine rhythm. Here's why that matters so much right now. Drift and burnout disconnect you from the parts of your soul that are meant to feel alive. Creativity reconnects them. It turns numbness into expression and pressure into praise. Psychologists call this flow state, the moment when you're so engaged in creating that you lose track of time. But spiritually, I call it something deeper, communion. Because in those moments, you're not performing, you're just being. You're meeting God in the act of creation. Let's talk about a few creative disciplines that can help you re-engage your heart. First is spiritual journaling. Not the kind where you write perfect, polished reflections, but the kind where you pour out your soul. Be honest, be raw. Write about what you're wrestling with, what you're grateful for, what you don't understand. David did this in the Psalms. Half of them sound like journal entries, if you ask me. They're messy, emotional, real, but that's the beauty. Honesty is a form of worship. And when you write, you give your emotions a name. And anything you can name, you can heal. Second, worship through art. What if you let art become prayer? Pick up that instrument again, sketch something, paint, take photos, write some poetry. Don't do it for approval, do it for presence. You might not think of your doodles or melodies as sacred, but they can be, because every act of creation says, God, I'm still here. I still have breath. I still believe beauty matters. In a world addicted to consuming, creating is a quiet act of rebellion. Third, the Lectio Divina. This ancient practice means divine reading. It's a way of reading scripture slowly, not for information, but for intimacy. Here's how it works. Read a short passage, pause when a word or phrase stands out, sit with it, meditate on it, ask God, what are you saying to me right now? Then respond in prayer or maybe in creative expression. Sometimes I'll write a poem or draw a picture. I like to do graphics art, or, I like digital art where I use Affinity Designer or Affinity Photo, and I create something that has meaning, not just to me, but I know it has meaning to the people that I share it with. And it stirs something in me, not to perform, but to let the word become alive in me. Here's what happens when you start doing this. You'll notice color returning to your life. You'll see beauty in small things again. The sound of rain, a conversation, a sunrise. Because creativity opens your eyes to wonder, and wonder is the opposite of apathy. When you make space to create, you're saying, God, breathe into me again. Maybe you're listening and thinking, but I'm not creative. Let me tell you, that's a lie. Creativity isn't limited to art. Cooking a meal with love is creativity. Parenting with patience is creativity. Finding a new way to serve someone, design a process, tell a story, that's creativity. You don't have to be an artist to create. You just have to be awake again. There's a beautiful verse in Ephesians 2:10 that says, we are God's workmanship, created in Christ Jesus to do good works. That word workmanship in Greek is, hope I'm saying it right, poema. It's where we get the word poem. You are God's poem, his creative expression. And when you live creatively, you're not just making something, you're mirroring the maker. Here's a deeper truth. Creativity heals what hustle breaks. When you create, you slow down enough to notice grace again. You rediscover joy. You return to the posture of a child, curious, playful, unashamed to make a mess. And maybe that's what your soul needs. Not more discipline, but more delight. Because joy isn't found in control, it's found in creation. So if you've been feeling empty, burnt out, disconnected, try this week to create something, anything. Write one page in a journal, take a photo that makes you smile, draw with your kids, bake some bread. Not to be productive, but to remember that you're still alive, because when you create, you touch eternity. You echo the heart of God. And slowly, piece by piece, you'll feel your fire start to flicker again. That's the beauty of this third anchor. The Sabbath stills the body, silence stills the mind, and creativity reignites the heart. Each rhythm reintroduces you to the life you were designed for. And when all three work together, you begin to live anchored, not by default, but by design. Next, we'll close out this episode by pulling all of these rhythms together, not as rules, but as rhythms of grace because this isn't about perfection. It's about returning. So let's land this with section 5, grace over guilt, the rhythm of return. Take a breath. You've made it here to the quiet end of the journey. We've talked about rest. We've talked about silence. We've talked about creativity. But before you rush off to do any of it, I want you to pause, because this isn't another checklist to conquer. It's an invitation to come home. And you see, drift doesn't happen overnight, and neither does re-anchoring. It happens slowly, moment by moment, rhythm by rhythm, choice by choice. And in that process, you're going to have good weeks and forgetful ones. You'll practice Sabbath beautifully one weekend and completely miss it the next. You'll sit in silence one morning and feel God's peace, and then the next day, all you'll feel is distraction. That's okay. That's part of the rhythm. Grace is built into it, because this isn't about performance. It's about presence. You're not trying to earn your way back to God. You're learning how to notice that He never left. Let me tell you something that freed me once. God isn't disappointed when you rest. He's delighted. He's not frustrated by your silence. He's in it. He's not waiting for you to create something worthy. He's smiling that you're creating at all. Because these rhythms aren't about perfection. They're about returning. Every time you rest, every time you pause, every time you pick up a pen or paintbrush or take a walk and just breathe, you're returning to the source. You're saying, God, I want to live from grace, not grind. There's a verse that has anchored me again and again. And that verse is, come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. And that verse is found in Matthew 11:28. Jesus didn't say, come to me when you have it together. He said, come to me when you're tired. He didn't promise productivity. He promised rest. And maybe that's what you've been needing. Not another goal, not another plan, but rest for your soul. So here's your next step. Not 3 new habits, not another overhaul, just one. Choose one rhythm this week. Sabbath, silence, or creativity. Whichever one speaks to you the most, start there. Practice it imperfectly, not to perform, but to be present. If it feels as if it's helping you, set a small reminder. Block a short window. Tell a friend. But most importantly, give yourself permission to start small, because re-anchoring your soul isn't about speed, it's about direction. And over time, you'll notice the shift. Your breath slows, your joy returns, your mind clears, and that faint flicker of fire, it'll start burning again. Not because you forced it, but because you finally made space for God to rekindle it. So wherever you're listening from right now, in your car, at your desk, on a walk, at the gym, I want you to hear this clearly. You're not behind. You're not broken. You are becoming. And every small act of returning is a victory. This is the Drift series. In this episode, this rhythm of re-anchoring is your invitation to live differently, to rest, to listen, to create, to live by design, not by default. Because burnout may be loud, but grace whispers louder. Until next time, remember, don't just live by default, live by design, God's design. Peace.